Shalom, welcome to the Jewish View. My name is Rabbi Nachman Simon with the Chabad House of Delmar, together with my co-host Mark Ronich of Statewide News Service, jbiztechphilly.com, and as you can see here, columnist for the Jewish Press.
Yeah, I have a column in there called Albany Beat, where I talk about how the government relates to the Jewish community, or doesn't, as the case may be. But with us today is the heart of government, what makes everything tick in politics and government, is Rachel Bledi, who's the elections commissioner, Republican elections commissioner at the Albany County Board of Elections. And you happen to be Jewish.
Right, I happen to be Jewish. But thank you for inviting me today. I appreciate it.
So nice to have you here, and welcome to the Jewish View.
Thank you.
And it's, this past election, what are your biggest challenges in the Board of Elections? What really...
Well, I think that people don't really understand the magnitude of the operation itself. Albany County, we're a fairly large county. We have approximately 176,000 active voters in this county. We have also 317 election districts countywide. And so essentially, in order to be in compliance with state election law statutes, you have to ensure that every single polling place is well represented in a bipartisan manner with 2 Democrats and 2 Republicans. And of course, there are weeks and weeks leading up to the election where we have to orchestrate this effort, and it requires to train election inspectors. It requires us to put out the information necessary for the public to be able to sort of view sample ballots, which we do online. Anyone can go online onto our website.
I like your website. You redid it recently,
Yes.
and it's so much better. I got to compliment you on
Yeah,
that,
thank you. We're trying to keep up with the times. Obviously, it's very important. A lot of people today, as you know, receive their information from online websites, whether it be social media or website itself. So what we do is we have an interactive mapping system that voters can actually go onto and look at their election districts, look at legislative districts, and kind of get a broad view and sense of what an election district is, what the political boundaries are. They can also download important information and get access to forms such as absentee ballots and voter registration forms. They can also look up their address and see where they have to vote and who their local representatives are.
Are you in the office every day? Do you have to deal with this every day?
I am. We are commissioners, are a full-time position in Albany County.
Where is the office?
On 32 North Russell Road, which is right near Westgate Plaza, off of Central Avenue. We're fairly accessible to the public. We have CDTA lines running right off of Central Avenue. We're centrally located in the county, so anyone at any point in the county can sort of come in, and we're centralized, and it's accessible and open to the public.
And do you find that people come in asking for things that you shake your head and you say, I can't believe you're asking me this?
Well, there's no such thing as a stupid question, right?
Stupid
Obviously,
answers.
because you're right, because you ultimately only learn by really asking. And so we embrace everyone who comes in, regardless of the question. I think that sometimes people find it difficult to distinguish between what our role is in terms of being a nonpartisan administrator of an elections process in Albany County versus information they want to know politically. So often we get questions about, where can I get a lawn sign for so-and-so, or where can I get a palm card for such and such candidate? And you sort of have to explain to them that we're not the county headquarters for political organizations. We simply administer elections in Albany County.
Now, traditionally, it's interesting you mentioned that, because for many years, and maybe there's some spots where it didn't happen, but generally, and in all counties, not just Albany, that the elections commissioner is also the county chairman of their particular party.
Correct.
And you were for a short time.
For a very short period. Yes, I was sort of a transitional figure in my organization. I had only really committed to doing it to one term.
But it was historic. You were the first woman.
The first woman.
And the first Jew.
Yes. I was breaking barriers on all levels, and I'm actually very proud of that.
Yeah.
I think there's this general perception about the Republican Party that it's predominantly dominated, right, by white males.
I was
And
going to ask you that
Yeah.
question next over here.
Sure.
Because, you're right that I don't know what's the right word or not a stigma, but it's just that, a Jewish person, I mean, even my parents, Republicans, I'm a Democrat. I mean, I personally call it like I see it, I mean,
Sure.
just like that's the way I am, I don't care what your party affiliation. If you're a good person, you're a good person. A good candidate is a good candidate. But Jews, I mean, because you do feel proud as a Jewish person,
Right.
how to overcome that barrier of, sometimes even people saying, well, that candidate, maybe on a national level, I don't think on a local level, is no good for the Jews. And they still get 50, 60%
Right.
of the Jewish vote.
So you're really referring to the issue of Israel itself, right? For example, and the role that it plays nationally from an international perspective. Now that a lot of people assume that a lot of Jews are going to start voting Republican because of what's going on with issues surrounding Israel itself, and how people perceive it, and some more general discussions regarding Israel in terms of its role with Palestinians. So I think that a lot of people make this assumption that a lot of Jews are now going to start voting, especially with the presidential election coming up, might actually start voting Republican, whereas you haven't seen it in large numbers in the past. In Obama's administration, from the first time he was elected to the second time he was elected, the Jewish vote went from 78%, I believe, to 69%. Now, how they actually measure these statistics, that's a very good question itself. I'm sure they have ways of identifying it, but as you ultimately know, names these days cross along the gamut of many sort of ethnicities and religions, and so it's hard to pinpoint who exactly is Jewish and who isn't, and how did they ultimately identify themselves in a poll.
Well, what's interesting is that even back in the 1800s, when Ulysses S. Grant ran for president, even though he kicked the Jews out of the South, or attempted to, the Jews are what carried him to victory.
Really?
Yeah, the Jewish vote
Right.
carried him to victory. And it was just so ironic that this, that happened. So way back when, under Grant's time, it was still, a Jewish issue. The Jews were very interested in the Republican politics, and a lot of Jews are Republicans.
They are.
They just,
Do you feel that they're getting more and more? I mean, some
well,
people
I've always
say,
wanted to start a Jewish Republicans group here in Albany
they have
County.
a national.
Yeah, but I wanted
Right.
to start
The
one in Albany
Republican Jewish
County.
Coalition,
You're
actually,
right.
yeah.
Because people here, I mean, they don't realize how many how many Jews are really Republicans.
Well, it's sort of interesting because, as we all know, Judaism is comprised of many different sects. And so it goes from, Reconstructionist and Reformed, conservative, all the way to modern Orthodox and to ultra-Orthodoxy itself. And I do believe that you sort of see a split in terms of how it views the Republican Party from one sect to another. And so generally what I feel that I see, and of course this is only my opinion, but I do think that there is a level of truth to it, is that when you move towards modern Orthodoxy and Orthodoxy itself, not so much ultra-Orthodoxy at times, but there is the general feeling that the Republican Party is more favorable to the Jewish interest. And then when you go towards a more left-leaning, more secular sects
Reform.
within Judaism, yes, I think they sort of come from a different perspective on the issues.
Because they're more socially inclined.
They're more socially
And that's
inclined.
where they vote.
A lot of them are immersed in academia simply
Right.
because there's this heavy emphasis within the Jewish religion itself towards education. And so the question is, where have you been? Who has influenced you in your thinking and your philosophies over time? And how has that gotten you to the point where you are at today and why you think the way you do? So our backgrounds and our experiences obviously always exert a large level of influence in how we think and how we vote. And so we do really see that.
Yeah, I know, because we interviewed him a few times, Simcha Felder, who's a Democrat senator, but
Right.
feels comfortable of caucusing with the Republicans and
Yes.
cross over. And I know Dov Heiken,
Yes.
he'll just, again, Orthodox people, kind of like what I was saying about myself, just saying, hey, we're interested in issues and we're not going to something detrimental to the Jewish community. Because he's one party, we're going to stick with him. Hey, if you're no good, you're no good. We'll just go somewhere else.
Right, and I grew up in the area of Brooklyn that Simcha Felder and Dov Heikind represent.
Borough Park?
And, well, it's also
Midwood?
Flatbush, yeah, Midwood area.
Okay.
And so a large part of the constituency down there is modern Orthodox to Orthodox. A lot of them are very pro-Israel. They have sent their children for a year to study abroad at yeshivas and at universities for a year. So there's that sort of close connection in a very real physical way to the issue of Israel itself, in addition to the social issues which they tend to be more conservative on. So in that respect, they do identify very closely with a lot of the ideals espoused by the Republican Party. So you're talking about, again, a different type of constituency and there's affiliations with religion itself.
Excellent.
And I wanted to ask you about digital voting.
Sure.
I mean, that's the paper ballots that we have now. Is that the digital voting that they?
That is
that what
a
it's been
scanned
termed?
voting.
Okay.
It's considered scanned voting.
Right.
And every state in our country has to sort of pick and choose between two different systems, essentially, because the system itself has to be certified. So if it's not certified, it's not in play. The systems we use in New York State have been certified by the State Board of Elections and ultimately by the Federal Elections Commission as well. So the system we have in place in New York State has its pluses and minuses, as does every system. And with us, what's nice about it is that you actually have a backup system, which is paperwork itself. So in the event that a machine malfunctions or there's a problem with an election and you have to go to a manual audit of the election and really look at the results as they were scanned into the machine, you always have that option of doing that. Now, I don't know if you remember the old lever machines in the past. At times, if they malfunctioned, you could find yourself in a real jam because
Literally.
there's no way to retrieve ultimately the results
Right.
of that voters cast all day
Well,
long.
you had to fill out a ballot.
Now you fill out a physical
Well,
ballot.
even with the levers, you had to then fill out if it jammed, if the lever jammed.
Right, in an
you'd have
emergency
to- and-
situation.
yeah.
But if you could, in fact, not fix a machine, because as you know, a lot of them were very antiquated,
Yeah.
and they had a million different pieces to them, you had a problem. But now we have this backup paper trail. So we can go to that paper trail and we could just manually count the election and sort of compare it to the results on the machine and see what needs to be done.
I have a story to tell you.
Sure.
That with those lever machines, that there was a Republican inspector who came to me, said, I showed up at 5:30 and there were 60 people who voted already. And they were all Democrat votes in the city of Albany. So,
Yeah.
thank goodness for digital voting now, because I don't think that can
Right.
happen. So,
Interestingly, all those sort of these myths that existed, whether they were true or they're not true anymore, there are a lot of systems in place that we have now that definitely give us better and greater integrity of the election, which is very important, including security itself. So in the past, were there ways that you could manipulate an election? Well, we'll leave that in history. I don't know of any particular moments, but I've heard stories.
okay.
However, in this day and age, that it's very difficult to manipulate an election because we have this verifiable paper trail.
Right.
And there are really mechanisms in place to guarantee the integrity of the election.
So about how many people vote in an off-year election or just in an election year?
Well, it depends. Like this year, the Republican turnout was 44%, and the Democratic turnout was lower. It was like 30-something percent, 34%, I believe. Last year, obviously, it was a gubernatorial election. We had also assembly and state, So it was a much higher turnout, and you had that SAFE Act sort of propelling a lot of Republicans actually to go out and vote. So the turnout was significantly higher, above 50% for Republicans itself. So I would say that, you really have to look at turnout. And in Albany County, for example, Republicans, in my opinion, do actually outperform given the enrollment differences, which is actually 3-1.
Yeah. Oh, really?
Republican, Democrat to Republican.
Yeah.
know who voted because when you sign in, that's how you're
Yes, we
figuring
always
it out?
do know who voted. We never know how
they-
you vote, and that is impossible to ever know.
So this past year, we had 64,000 people vote
Right.
Out of,
out of,
176,000.
So
That's
one
active,
third.
yeah,
Yeah.
active voters.
it's about a
Okay.
third, you're talking about a third people voted.
Right.
that's good math.
We are seeing the general trend now is to actually see more people enroll unaffiliated than sort of have allegiance to any one particular party. It is a trend. I think that a lot of people now, more so than in the past, consider themselves to be independents, right? And not really loyal or affiliated with any one particular sort of philosophy.
So, let me ask you what the differences are, and I'm going to run through several types of voting, and you could tell me. There's a paper ballot, an absentee ballot, a military ballot, a blank, a void, overvotes, undervotes, double votes.
Right.
What does all
The
that
terminology
mean?
can get a little bit confusing over time, but an absentee ballot is a ballot that an individual voter could cast if they are not going to be able to make it to the polling place on election day. And you have to have a valid reason, and there are several sort of qualifications you have to meet. And so one of the reasons, for example, that you would have to vote absentee ballot is because you are permanently disabled, for example.
Or you'll be out of town on business.
Or you're out of town on business. Something as simple as that, you can vote via absentee ballot. We do not have early voting in New York State. It is being discussed nationally everywhere, and it also dominates our topic of conversation here in
It
New York
would be
State.
good, that would be good, meaning if you're going to be out of town on election day, well, let me,
Vote.
vote in a week early, that's what would be
2
the
weeks,
advantage.
for example, 2 weeks early, right.
Well, that's what Mario Cuomo, even back in the
Mm-hmm.
80s, Mario Cuomo would say, if it snows in Messina and they can't get out to vote on election day, why should they be deprived from voting? Why does election day have to be only one day? Back in the 80s, they were saying that.
However,
And-
there is a catch to that, okay, which is, of course, cost. So money, a lot of times, does drive these sort of discussions, and in our state, that really was a dominating force in terms of driving the drive against early voting.
Because it would cost more.
The cost is pretty significant, and let me explain to you how. For example, if you had early voting, you would have to open up every single polling place, and you would have to have 4 inspectors at each polling place. Each inspector on election day alone, if they're there from 6 a.m. to 9 p.m., makes $200 for the day. On primary day, you get paid $100 a day. But that's per inspector. And then in addition to that, there's $25 that they get paid for the training session itself.
So it's about $300,000 for the inspectors. And,
Correct.
Yeah, okay.
And you have to move the machines. And then there's the other issue of ensuring ballot security, which is a big issue because we're sort of entrusting our machines in the hands of, individuals who are in charge of facilities and buildings. And in the course of a day, you can have hundreds of people walk in and out of a building. And so ultimately the question is, are we going to allow voting machines to remain at one particular location for 2 weeks, sometimes unattended for hours at a time?
Well, or the voting machines could simply be put at the county board of elections, and if they want to vote early, you got to come to the board of elections and during business hours, and
Right.
you have to vote that way.
Right, that would make sense. However, there are a lot of people who say that's not fair and that voting has to be much more accessible. So in that respect, you have to have more than just one polling location.
So Mario Cuomo again said, more accessible, why can't we do mobile units and have them drive around to different town halls and sit in different town halls for periods of time, and then, have people come and vote early if they want to.
Yeah.
And then you could secure the mobile unit.
It's not something that we should discount at all. However, you put enough people in a room, you're going to get enough opinions on the matter. And we often find that in politics and government in general, when we discuss these issues, the intricacies itself pose sort of like a roadblock, for people pulling the trigger on some of these issues. And so given costs, given logistics, and so many other issues, it's very difficult.
So paper ballot. What
Yes.
is that?
That's simply the ballot that is scanned into the machine on election day.
Okay, that's nothing else, that's not a separate type of ballot?
No,
No.
no,
Okay.
no. We do have like affidavit ballots
Affidavit,
that
okay.
you can fill out at a polling place if, for example, you moved within, if you're registered to vote in Albany County and you move within Albany County only, and on election, and you never updated your new address, if you go to the correct polling place, you can vote via affidavit ballot.
Okay, and then military ballot?
Military ballot is obviously a military ballot for people who are serving overseas.
They have to request a
Yes,
military,
and
you have to get a
it's
request.
online. It's an online emailing
Oh.
system. Yes, and we upload the ballots, and we try to make it as easy as possible
Okay,
for them to vote.
So the time frame is shorter now?
They actually go out, correct. They actually go out before the regular apps. Our deadline is prior to regular absentee ballots going out.
Uh-huh.
And there are times where it is complicated because we have pending court cases.
Right.
And so it's sort of like a last minute thing where you have to turn around ballots almost like overnight sometimes.
Yeah, I've seen, okay, now blank and void? What does that
Right,
mean?
so a voided ballot is a ballot that if a voter went to a polling place and they ripped it or made a mistake and intended to vote for someone and they filled in the wrong circle, so they could request a different ballot and the inspector voids that ballot that they were originally given.
And when you total up, you note how many void ballots there were?
Right, well, we know
On the
because
official, yeah.
they're not scanned into the machine, they're
Right.
placed separately.
And then the blank,
So
Or-
a blank vote is a vote that it's
someone
when
who went to the polling place
Correct.
but didn't vote for a certain candidate but voted for others?
sometimes the entire ballot is left blank.
Wow.
There have been times where voters have said to inspectors, this is going to be a protest vote, you know. Sometimes they'd like to declare it. So, you know, while most people are very, you know, secretive about who they actually vote for, there are individuals who say, I'm not casting a vote for anyone. I'm just putting in a blank vote, you know,
see.
ballot, and it's a no vote.
Oh, so that they show that they signed in, that they did.
They signed in,
that they
and
signed
they
in
cast
so
a
that they
ballot, and it was a protest vote.
And there were overvotes and undervotes?
Yeah, an overvote is, we see that often in scenarios where you have to, let's say, vote for 3 councilmen.
Oh, okay.
So you have numerous candidates on the ballot.
Might have 8 candidates for 3 positions.
Correct, for 3 positions, and it's vote for 3. And sometimes people don't really, it's not that clear to them.
Yeah.
So they'll vote for, and sometimes inadvertently, they know they have to vote for 3, but they really fill in circles for 4 people. So that's an overvote. The machine will actually spit back the ballot and say, there's an overvote, you know, do you want a new ballot or do you want to just cast it? In which case, it doesn't count, obviously,
Oh,
for that race.
For that
Yes,
race, it
yes,
wouldn't count at all?
Yes, because
Okay.
you can't vote for more candidates than you're allowed
Right.
to.
Well, you lose that, okay.
Right.
And then, and that's the overvote. The undervote is when you have to vote for 3, but you only choose 2?
Correct.
Okay.
That is allowed?
Absolutely.
And that
If you
would be counted?
you can vote for whoever you would like to vote, and if you don't want to vote for 3, and you can vote for 3, you do not have to.
Right. And the double votes? What are double votes? I saw that on someone's,
It could be like a situation where,
it
you know,
was vote for, well,
there was someone on the ballot and then they wrote in the same name down on the bottom of the ballot. Oftentimes we see that happen a lot. People think they're confirming a vote,
Okay.
and so they'll write in, they're confirming essentially in the write-in location.
okay, now I have to ask you about next year.
Sure.
You must be trembling.
No, I never
At the
tremble.
At the County Board of Elections, there must be staff trembling.
You mean because of the
Because
4 elections,
there are
right?
going to be 6 elections. It's going to be
Well,
in March,
yeah.
village elections.
Okay, yes, yeah.
Okay.
We actually, villages administer their own elections. We just let them borrow our machines.
Okay.
So while there is a general trend towards boards of elections taking over those operations, we do not administer their elections. We only allow them to use our equipment.
All right. And then April 19th is a presidential primary.
Right.
And I understand we're going to have some special elections that day also. for some assembly seats or Senate seats.
So it's
It
not a
could be.
special one, because I saw that,
Yeah, that's coming
so
up.
they do that, I mean, I was just saying, it's so much money, like you were
I
saying
know.
before, but they're gonna just
Yeah,
dovetail it with, anyway,
right,
with
the
the primary.
presidential primary. And then in May, there are school board and budget elections,
Right.
school budget elections, which you loan
We,
out the
again, we
machines?
loan out the machines, yes. We
But
don't
the
conduct the
school-
election, we loan out the machines.
And so we don't have to use the lever machines for school
Right,
boards?
well,
'Cause a couple
the-
years ago I did.
Right,
you
no,
know,
and
so-
some municipalities still do. They're getting exemptions for moving to this new system. But as you all know, the reason that these new systems were purchased was so that we could also be in compliance with the American Disabilities Act, so that you have better access for people who need, voting equipment that will really enable them to help more readily and more easily.
And then June 21st is a federal office congressional primaries, so that if someone, let's say a state assemblyman is running for Congress and they lose the congressional primary, they could still have the opportunity to run for their assembly seat or Senate seat.
Well,
It's
yeah.
petition time.
Right,
So
right,
it's still
right.
they could still circulate petitions if they lose the primary.
Right. Well, we see a lot of craziness during the campaign time, but that's just part of the game.
So June 21st is the congressional primaries. September 6th is the state and local primary elections.
Right.
November 8th is the general election. And then some counties have fire department elections, which we don't have here.
Right,
in
we
the
don't.
state.
Right.
But let me ask
you know,
you
I'm saying
something,
that
Mark,
people are gonna. No wonder there's low
It's
turnout.
definitely, it's confusing. The public is not really always aware that there are so many different dates and elections,
There's
and
6.
really only die-hard party activists and loyalists are really who are interested in this stuff, sort of
Yeah.
understand that there's a separate presidential and congressional primary.
It's also about money. How much do these elections cost? Like you
Well-
were talking about just even 300,000
Right.
for the inspectors.
Yeah.
I just remember there's just,
I mean, that's going to be did you budget? Did the
We
county?
do, and we do. We always budget in advance, and
So what did you budget
we
for all these
explain to
election
them.
inspectors?
Well, we do. It's like well over $3 million at this point for our department alone.
Just
we do,
for the inspectors? Or
no,
just
for the
these-
inspectors itself, it's about like $200,000, $250,000.
But that would be for one election.
And also moving machines, right?
Yeah.
We also have to move machines back and forth from the polling place. So, there are definitely increased costs associated with all these elections.
but you're being paid for, you're Albany County.
Right.
Who pays you, not the Republican Party?
No, Albany County pays, right.
If it was the Republican Party, she wouldn't be there.
Right. It's the
No, it's
county
the
does
county.
does pay for us.
So
Yeah.
they pay equally for Democrats and
Yes,
Republicans?
we're a
There's
bipartisan
no-
That's right,
board. We're a
yes.
complete parallel reflection of one another. So for every Republican, you have a Democrat, and that's really the
Right.
best way to ensure ballot security and the integrity of the election.
Just because Democrats outnumber Republicans 3-1 doesn't mean that their staff outnumbers
Right.
Republicans.
That's
And
what I
let's
was
be
kinda
honest,
thinking,
just
you know.
because you're a Democrat doesn't mean that, that within the Democratic Party itself there aren't divisions.
Right.
So sometimes there are individuals within the Democratic Party who sort of are glad to see the Republicans be represented because, in a sense, we're representing their interests as well, which is to safeguard the election. Ultimately, that's our mission and our goal. I will say this, that in Albany County, we have done something very unique. We have moved to an in-house ballot printing operation, and we've reduced the cost of printing ballots from 58 cents to 8 cents a piece.
That's pretty good.
Yeah, and actually, if you think about it, it saves hundreds of thousands of dollars for taxpayers in Albany County. It's not an easy thing to do, but we have a system down.
Who
And
came up with that?
well, I think it was like just sort of a general discussion about, how to save money in the county.
Was that your, but did it
Well, I
generate from
really
you?
did actually push for it very
Excellent.
heavily, and we did it when I
Sounds
was
like
there.
something you would do,
Yeah,
yeah.
absolutely. I think that
Does
you
it
have
does-
to be innovative.
Your counterpart on the Democratic side is still Matt Klein?
Yes, it is.
And I know Matt Klein is like, from my experience when we've had, he would take a calculator and add things up. I always thought he would take an abacus.
Right.
But, he has a calculator. He doesn't even use a computer. I mean, this guy, it's just.
He does
so-
use a computer now, actually. So he's sort of transitioning into the new
Transitioning.
age. Yeah.
It's like, so.
But however, I will say this, that I did have to convince him a little bit, but he finally came aboard when he saw the potential savings. We received a lot of support from the county legislature on this issue, who ultimately controls portions of our budget. So we did it. It was very successful, and we've been doing it now for quite a few election cycles.
Excellent. And you can make changes quickly
Immediately.
if you're under your own control. You don't have to
Immediately,
send it out to a
yes.
printer and have them change it and wait for their processing. You can do it right there.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's much better.
It's a general trend now in the state. We did it, a couple of other counties did it, and now other counties are starting to look into this process as well,
And you
realizing
have-
that it's doable.
And you have the room on North Russell Road. I mean,
Yes.
It's not like, you had you were cramped where you were before.
Well, we used to share the building with the county clerk's office,
Right.
and then they moved.
But I'm saying even before your time, when you were down in
the courthouse.
In the courthouse,
Yes.
yeah, it was cramped there.
Right.
How many years have you been there?
I've been there for about 4 years, going to 5, but it's been a very rewarding experience.
Is this like an $80,000 a year salary? Or?
Yes, yeah, it's 88,232 to be precise.
Okay.
We're open and transparent about it in Albany County.
Of course.
It's
I didn't
online.
think I was asking anything out of school.
No. And actually, as a general thought, county taxpayers can go online and inspect budgets right on the county website and actually see the salary breakdowns for every position in the county.
He thinks it's impertinent when I ask these
you
questions
don't
about
ask.
money. But,
Your age, your weight, your money, these
No,
Yeah,
are
but I
things
guess,
you
you
don't
know,
age and weight, I don't ask about.
I am a government official, so everything I do has to be open and
Alright.
transparent to the taxpayers.
No,
Right, Mark,
and that's great, and
Yeah.
congratulations. And really, I think you're doing a great job.
Thank
I
you.
really like a lot of the things that I've seen over the past 4 years. The improvements that have been made. So
Yeah, there's always room for improvement, so we keep trying.
But you're
Yeah.
moving it along a lot more than the other commissioners that I've known have moved it along.
Well,
So-
I think I also come from a different generation
you
and
do.
age where I
Yes, you
embrace
do.
technology and new ideas, and I'm not as intimidated and apprehensive about using these sort of mechanisms. So,
Excellent.
Yeah.
All right, so I want to thank you, Rachel, for being on.
Oh, thank
You're
you
a
for inviting
pioneer,
me.
being a woman, being a Jewish woman in the Republican Party, and we look forward to bigger and better things from you, and do it with good health.
Best of
thank you
success,
so much.
yes.
Thank you for having me.